Good afternoon and welcome to another I3h reading seminar. Thank you for joining online and thank you for being here on site. We have the luck to introduce to you Isabelle Verduyn, who is, she studied law at the University of Antwerp and then continued studying an advanced master, I would say, in management and policy in healthcare and at KU Leuven, and under the supervision of Leuven, who also already presented at I3h. She worked and defended her thesis successfully. She worked on a just price in the context of pharmaceuticals, whether or not it's a utopia. She will present to us the findings of her literature review and focus group study. And she currently works as a lawyer at I3h Law, where she is responsible to guide collaborations between medical doctors and hospitals, or medical doctors amongst them, with respect to responsibility issues, liability issues. So thank you very much. We're looking forward. And just for the audience online, Isabelle will present, and afterwards, if you have questions, we might discuss them. Thank you so much, Isabelle, for being with us.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for having me here today. It's an absolute honor to be speaking to all of you, also the ones that are following online. Also, thank you for the brief introduction. I am indeed Isabelle Verduyn. I am a lawyer at the Antwerp Bar since 2018 and a member of I3h Law since 2023, where I joined the healthcare team. And in September this year, I gained my master's degree in healthcare management and policy at the KU Leuven, and my master's thesis focused on fair pricing in the pharmaceutical context, which is what I would like to discuss with you all today. I noticed that in December last year, Anna Hendricks held a seminar on drug prices in Belgium, exploring the impact of setting fair prices. And I will refer to the AIM model as well in my presentation, but not in detail. Instead, I'll offer a more critical perspective on the model. However, the presentation of Anna Hendricks is highly recommended to watch because the AIM fair pricing model is a fascinating model to consider. So I highly recommend to watch her presentation if you want to learn more about that model. So the prices of innovative medicines are rising sharply. It's becoming increasingly common for people to organize crowdfunding projects to raise money for life-saving medication. A well-known example in Belgium is a 2019 case of baby Pia, who was diagnosed with SMA, and her parents launched a crowdfunding to cover the cost of the drug Zolgensma, which was priced at almost 2 million euros at the time, making it the most expensive medicine available at the time. But since then, even more expensive medicines have entered the market, such as Livmeldy and Hemgenix, priced at almost $3.5 million per treatment. And the prices of medicines have become a hot topic with a lot of public frustration. The pharmaceutical sector is often accused of using the patient's vulnerability to impose excessive prices. And there kind of exists a perception of injustice towards the pharmaceutical industry. However, it's important to know that the pharmaceutical industry faces diverse public expectations. On one hand, we want the pharmaceutical industry to continuously create new medicines, often very quickly, especially in times of urgent needs, like during the COVID-19 pandemic. But on the other hand, we want them to price their medicines fairly, responsibly, and ensure they are affordable, rather than focusing only on profit maximization. And this is a challenging task with an ongoing tension between cost control and innovation. And that's also because we are highly dependent on the pharmaceutical industry. The pharma holds a certain power over all of us. Our health relies on the medicines provided by the pharmaceutical industry. And this brings a level of caution regarding price regulation, because we certainly do not want the pharmaceutical industry to respond by saying, okay, we'll quit. We won't invest in new research and innovation anymore. We certainly don't want to risk that. However, the rising trend in drug prices is very concerning. It raises the question of what a fair price for a medicine should be. And this certainly is an interesting and important question, and I took the opportunity to investigate this topic in my master's thesis. I aimed to explore whether the concept of a fair price for a medicine can be defined not only in a pure theoretical way, but more specific in an operational manner. Or maybe should we conclude that a just price or a fair price doesn't exist at all? Maybe it is just a utopia. So as I have mentioned, I investigated whether the concept of a fair price in the context of medicines can be defined in an operational manner. And this forms the main research question in my thesis. And to answer this, I have specified two sub-questions. The first question is, what are the defining elements in a fair price? So which definitions can be found in the literature, and are there any returning elements that appear over and over again? Second question is, which interests and of whom need to be united when we want to set a fair price? So who are the stakeholders and which interests do they have? And to answer these questions, I combined two methods. I conducted a concept analysis using the method of Walker and Evans, which consists of 8 steps. Additionally, I organized a focus group study. The 8 steps of the Walker and Evans method are as follows. The first step is, of course, selecting a concept to be analyzed, in this case, a just price in the context of pharmaceuticals. The second step is about determining the purposes of the analysis. Why am I doing this concept analysis? Step 3 is about identifying all uses of the concept. Step 4 is about determining the defining attributes or elements of the concept. So it is about finding the most common characteristics that appear over and over again in the literature. And Walker and Evans regard this 4th step as the heart of the concept analysis. And in my thesis, I have executed this 4th step through combining research in the literature and the organization of a focus group study. In the 5th step, the analyst tries to develop one or more model cases that represent a real-life example of the use of the concept that includes all elements. Contrary cases are developed in the 6th step. The 7th step is about to identify antecedents and consequences, and in the last step, the critical attributes or elements and their empirical reference are brought together. But in this presentation, I will only focus on step 4, 5, and 6, so the heart of the concept analysis. So step 4 is about determining the defining attributes or elements of the concept. And as I have mentioned earlier, I did research in the literature and I also organized a focus group study. I will first talk about what I have found in the literature, what I read in the literature, and later on I will discuss my results of the focus group study. A lot has been written already about the topic fair prices in the context of pharmaceuticals. And in the literature, you can find a lot of definitions of a fair price for a medicine. And on the slide, you can see a few of them. And when you read these definitions, certain elements reappear over and over again, such as affordability, value, profitability, innovation, and so on. I will just give you 2 minutes to read some of the definitions, and then I will continue the presentation. Okay, then I will continue. For my thesis, I wasn't able to conduct a systematic literature review all by myself because of a lack of time. So I was very lucky to read the publication of Rudiger and others that is about a systematic literature research exactly about this topic. And the article was published in April 2024, so it is a very recent publication, what makes it very interesting. And when you read the results of the study, affordability, value, investment in R&D, profitability, cost effectiveness, dynamic efficiency, unmet medical need, and supply security are identified as attributes or elements of the concept fair price. Transparency of the costs is also mentioned, but not necessarily as an attribute or an element of a fair price, but as a precondition to achieve a fair price. And most of the definitions found in the literature, they describe a fair price as a balance of attributes or elements, such as the R&D investment, the value, and the affordability. And most of the included articles seem to accept that defining a fair price for a medicine may lead to a dilemma, but I will come back to that later on. In the literature, there are essentially two major fair pricing approaches, the cost plus pricing method and the value-based pricing method. You are probably all already familiar with these approaches, so I will keep it brief, but it is interesting to have a look at both approaches, but within the framework of the elements that Rudiger has described in his article. So which elements are included in both approaches, or in one of them, and which elements are missing or are not guaranteed in both approaches, or one of them. Within the cost plus pricing methods, a fair price for a medicine is deemed fair when it relates to the development and the production costs and allows in a reasonable profit margin. An increase of costs justifies an increase in price. So in other words, the higher the costs, the higher the price can be. And this method has certain advantages. It guarantees that pharmaceutical companies are always covered for their costs of R&D and production. And the price is relatively objective and measurable. However, this method can only be applied if there is knowledge about the actual costs made and the expected profit margin. We have to know how much was invested in the drug's development, how many resources were lost on failed projects, for example, how many research and development costs were covered through subsidies of the government, and so on. However, transparency proves to be a sensitive issue. Another disadvantage of this method is that it does not offer an incentive to cost efficiency because the costs are always covered. So there is no correction for cost efficiency. The higher the costs, the higher the price can be. And there is also uncertainty about which costs should or should not be included. For example, what do we do with the costs of failed projects? And of course, the question raises, what is a reasonable profit margin? Is it 5%? Is it 10%? Does it depend on the kind of medicine? And what profit margin is being referred to? Is it the profit margin for each medicine? So for each medicine the pharma company produces, it can have a reasonable profit? Or is it about the total profit margin the pharmaceutical company can have, for example, within 1 year for all the produced medicines together? So we first have to describe and agree what makes a profit margin reasonable. So we first have to define reasonable profit margin before we can use that concept in another definition that we want to be operational. And finally, this model does not consider the value of medicine. It does not reward value. So the pharmaceutical industry is not encouraged to keep innovating in this cost-plus pricing method model. So looking back at Rudiger's research, we must conclude that not all attributes or elements can be found in this model, especially value and affordability are not included. What about the value-based pricing method? In the value-based pricing method, the added value of the medicine to the patient and the society is considered, regardless of the costs made, of the cost that the pharmaceutical company has made. The price is set after considering how much the medicine is worth, considering the therapeutic value, the availability of existing alternatives on the market, and so on. So the higher the added value, the higher the value. This method provides incentives for pharmaceutical industry to keep innovating, to continue investing in new research in innovation. But there is no guarantee that the costs that are made will be covered. So the pharmaceutical company bears the full risk of failure and high costs. But the biggest problem certainly is the affordability. In principle, paying higher prices for better medicines should provide incentives for development of better drugs. But in practice, value-based pricing can far exceed affordability thresholds. And according to the World Health Organization, a value-based pricing method is not viable in many countries because it does not take into account the affordability and the total costs. So the application of the value-based pricing model can lead to very high prices that bear no relation to the investments made, jeopardizing access to very valuable medicines. So referring back to Rudiger's research, we can conclude, or we must conclude, that the value-based pricing method also does not include all elements or attributes. For example, it does not take into account the investments made in research and development, and affordability is not included as well. Mixed models also exist, and they are becoming increasingly common. In several definitions of a fair price, both the principles of the value-based pricing method and the cost-plus pricing method are reflected. For example, in the definition of the ECL suggests a value-based pricing approach as it encourages the pharmaceutical industry to develop medicines that meet the needs of our society. The definition states within the aims of and priorities of the healthcare systems. And the costs of bringing the medicine to market should be in a reasonable proportion to the price. And finally, the price may not put pressure on the sustainability of our healthcare system. Another definition is one of Guinea, and in this definition, the price of a medicine must at least cover the R&D costs, but also the value of the product, the size of the market, and the affordability must also be taken into account. It is noted that mixed pricing methods align more closely within the findings from Rudiger's research. The cost-plus pricing method and the value-based pricing methods do not consider affordability. However, in Rudiger's research, affordability is identified as the most frequently mentioned element or attribute of a fair price. It is mentioned in a lot of definitions. Affordability goes hand in hand with sustainability. If you take a look at the definition of the World Health Organization, it states fair pricing means pricing that allows for a reasonable return on investment in exchange for an affordable price, which is to say one that does not bankrupt health system and other payers. That affordability and sustainability are linked to each other is kind of logical. Next to that, a lot of organizations and authors mention the potential tension between value and affordability. For example, the European Cancer League states that any definition of a fair price should be linked to value. However, there might be a dilemma between value and affordability. So affordability indeed is an element or attribute of a fair price. In almost all definitions, it appears, as you can see on the slide over here. But then, an important question to ask ourselves is the question: who is responsible for the affordability and accessibility of medicines? Is it the pharmaceutical company, or is it the society or the government, or are both of them responsible for the accessibility? The answer is not clear. For some, at least the pharmaceutical industry bears this responsibility. They state that pharmaceutical companies must price new medicines responsibly and fairly to ensure they are accessible and affordable for all of us. But for others, the right of patients to access medicines does not automatically impose an obligation or a responsibility on the pharmaceutical industry to make these medicines available at affordable prices, especially when it comes at the expense of their own profits. Forcing companies to lower their prices is just one way to make the medicines available. Another way is for the society as a whole to take responsibility for ensuring that patients have access to the drugs they need. But in that point of view, of course, we have to keep in mind that government budgets are not endless. There is not enough money to finance every medical treatment on the market, not at all. So we have to make choices. We need to make choices. In a lot of publications, transparency is mentioned as a necessary condition for achieving a fair price. It is about transparency, about the costs made, about how much public money is spent on discovery research, for example, how much the profit margins are, but also about the medical value of the medicine and so on. However, this transparency seems to be a big issue. And in the literature and also in a lot of policy documents, the pharmaceutical industry has often been criticized for its lack of transparency on this information. But it seems to be not that simple. To summarize the findings in the literature, we need to strike a balance between, on one hand, the affordability, accessibility, and the sustainability of our healthcare system, and on the other hand, the economic interests of the pharmaceutical company, and of course, the incentives for innovation. The price of a medicine should not be too high, as this jeopardizes accessibility and sustainability and affordability. But however, it also should not be too low, because low prices will discourage the pharmaceutical industry from bringing new medicines to markets, potentially leading to a shortage of medicines in the long term. Therefore, the unmet medical need requires incentives for innovation. Therefore, the reward for investments must be sufficiently attractive enough. So we have to strike a balance. So as I've mentioned before, I also organized a focus group study to kind of check whether the elements found in the literature, the elements that we have found in the article of Rodiger, align with the perspectives of the participants in a focus group study. In general, the goal of a focus group study is to gain insights through small group discussions focused on a particular topic. In this case, of course, fair pricing in the context of drugs. Specifically, I asked the participants who they believe are the involved parties and why. So which parties or stakeholders and which interests need to be aligned or need to be united in a price when we want to achieve a fair price. I have chosen to organize a focus group study considering of two groups. And I've chosen to organize a focus group study rather than, for example, one-on-one interviews, because in group discussions, you have the possibility to see and observe an interactive process, an interactive discussion where the participants can be influenced by each other. And the interactive responses allowed me to gather more contextual, nuanced, qualitative data and to get a depth insight into the participants' perceptions and opinions on the fair pricing debate. I have chosen to organize 2 small focus groups consisting of 5 to 6 participants, and one group was composed of experts in the field, so persons who are actively involved in the pricing debate, either through personal circumstances or their profession. So these participants have experience or knowledge about the subject. Think about health economics, think about representatives of the pharmaceutical industry, and so on. And the second group was composed of non-experts, so individuals who have little to no knowledge about this topic. Of course, it is important that participants feel comfortable expressing their points of view in the group, and that's why I have chosen to work with these 2 groups, experts and non-experts. I wanted to ensure that the participants feel comfortable within the group and that an open conversation between all the participants where they can say something would be possible. So what about the results? In both focus groups, patients, the government, and the pharmaceutical industry were mentioned as important stakeholders. They were mentioned as having an interest in the price of medicines. The clinicians were also mentioned because they want to offer their patients the best medicines to an affordable price, because of course they want their patients to be and stay healthy. The clinicians, however, they were mentioned very shortly, so I will focus in my presentation, and I have done this in my thesis as well, on just the 3 main stakeholders, the patients, the government, and the pharmaceutical industry. On the slide, you can see future patients. Indeed, in both focus groups was mentioned that not only the patients of today have an interest in the price, but also our children, our grandchildren, and so on, who will possibly need medication in the future. So we want medicines to be financially accessible, not only for ourselves, but also for the future patients. And in that regard, actually, we all have an interest in the pricing debate. Coming to the interests of each stakeholder. So in both focus groups, I have asked the participants why the stakeholders that were mentioned by them do have an interest in the pricing of medicine. So what are their underlying interests? First, what about the patients? In both focus groups, especially accessibility and the right to health were mentioned as primary concerns for patients. Patients want to be healthy, they want to stay healthy, and they are dependent on the medicines developed and made available by pharmaceutical companies. The medical value can vary from one drug to another. For instance, if there are 2 drugs available on the market for the same illness, one drug has a lot of side effects and the other drug has almost no side effects. Both focus groups agreed that the drug with fewer side effects could have a higher price. In other words, the better the medicine, the higher the price can be. What was also discussed in both focus groups is that when the long-term health effects of the medicine are uncertain, they should also be taken into account in its pricing. So the medical value is important and could have an impact on the price. The access to drugs can be hindered for the patient when he doesn't have the financial means to pay for it. In both focus groups, particularly in the non-expert group, it was highlighted that there are any income disparities among the patients, affecting their financial ability to buy medicines. Therefore, financial accessibility is somewhat subjective, as it depends on the individual income, but also on whether the government provides a reimbursement for the medicine or not. What about the government? In both focus groups, it was mentioned or pointed out that the government has an interest in ensuring that its citizens are and stay healthy. And this implies that the citizens have access to medicines and that those medicines are affordable for them. And the government can contribute to this financial accessibility by negotiating with pharmaceutical companies regarding the price of the drugs, but also through its reimbursement policy. However, as I've mentioned before, the government cannot guarantee reimbursement for every medicine. So choices have to be made on, for example, the medical value and the cost effectiveness of the medicine. What about the pharmaceutical industry? A first interest that was brought up in both focus groups is that the pharmaceutical companies must be able to recover their costs made in research and development and production. Otherwise, the industry will be unwilling to invest in new research. In this context, the size of the target market was also mentioned. If companies aim to recover their incurred costs from the patients, this will be reflected in the price per patient, which will be very high for orphan drugs and relatively low for common drugs. In the expert focus group, it was also noted that determining prices only based on the incurred costs can lead to incorrect incentives. It was mentioned that the goal should not be to reward the pharmaceutical companies for their inefficiency. In the non-expert focus group, the potential dilemma between the industry's interests in recovering costs and, on the other hand, affordability for individuals was also discussed. Additionally, of course, companies need to make a profit. We are still dealing with an industry that on one hand has a social purpose, but on the other hand must also be accountable for its shareholders. The profit must be reasonable, but what is meant by a reasonable profit margin was not clarified in both focus groups. But it should certainly not be an excessive profit. In any case, the pricing of medicines must ensure that the pharmaceutical industry is continuously encouraged to innovate and bring new effective medicines to the market. So there is a common interest amongst all stakeholders, the interest of innovation. In both focus groups, it was discussed that insight is needed into the investments and costs incurred, the calculated profit margin, and also the financial support received from the government. And in the expert focus group, it was noted, of course, that calculating the investments and costs is not straightforward, but seems to be a big problem for the pharmaceutical industry. In the expert focus group, it was also mentioned that there is a transparency obligation, not only for the pharmaceutical industry, but also for the society regarding their willingness to pay, which may vary between different types of medications. For example, the willingness to pay can be higher for orphan drugs than for common drugs. And this transparency obligation for the society was only mentioned in the expert focus group. So according to the participants in the focus group study, there are 4 stakeholders, each with their underlying interests that should be united in a price of a medicine. And you can see that some terms that we have just discussed in relation to the literature, in relation to the research by Rudiger, reappear over here. Think about affordability, value, investment in R&D, and so on. You can see it on the slides. But what is not highlighted as an element by Rudiger's research, but however was mentioned in the focus group study, is the element of uncertainty associated with medicines when they come to market. When the long-term health effects of a drug are still uncertain at the time they enter the market, this should also be taken into account in the pricing. In this way, the risks that are inherent to the pharmaceutical market can be somewhat being shared between the government and the pharmaceutical industry. Furthermore, the non-expert focus group noted that the pharmaceutical industry is a strategic sector, and both focus groups, they expressed some concern about the loss of pharmaceutical experience, knowledge, expertise within the national borders, or more broadly within Europe. But there was no consensus regarding the question whether location of the companies or employment within the country. So actually the question whether a national interest should also indeed play a role in the pricing of medicines. A common interest of everyone is that the pricing of medicine must ensure that the pharmaceutical industry is continuously encouraged to innovate and bring new, effective, valuable medicines to markets. So is it possible to define a fair price in an operational way? I don't know. Suppose a pharmaceutical company brings a new fantastic medication to market, but the R&D costs are enormous. However, even though the company has worked perfectly cost effectively, the medicine costs, let's say, about 100,000 euros per treatment every 3 years. And the pharmaceutical company makes only 1% of profits. Is this a fair price, the 100,000 euros per treatment? We have a medication that meets our needs. It's a very valuable medication, but the pharmaceutical company is not satisfied because it has barely any profit. And yet for many patients, it remains unaffordable. So what do we do about it? So as I have mentioned before, the definitions in the literature are conceptual. They refer to factors such as affordability, reasonable profit margin, and incentive for innovation, but these concepts are contextual. They were also raised in both focus groups, but without a concrete definition. The organization AIM has tried to make the concept of a fair price operational with its fair pricing model. They offer a tool to calculate a fair price for every medicine. As I have said in the beginning of my presentation, Anna Hendricks held a seminar about this model in December last year, and I highly recommend to watch this presentation if you want to know more about this interesting model. In my presentation, I will just give a brief critical perspective on a few aspects of the model. For example, the question, what is a reasonable profit margin? The AIM fair pricing calculator uses 8% of total costs. But it is questionable, excuse me, whether this percentage is reasonable in every situation, so for every developed medicine, both from the perspective of the government and patients, as from the perspective of the pharmaceutical industry. Furthermore, creating an upper limit may discourage the pharmaceutical industry from doing further research. This also brings us back to the issue of transparency regarding research and development costs. When a specific profit margin is set based on the incurred costs, the first question is, which costs are actually considered? How are they calculated? Can they be controlled? And so on. Furthermore, as I've mentioned before, we want to encourage the pharmaceutical industry to keep innovating. And the AIM fair pricing model includes an innovation bonus ranging from 5 up to 40% of costs, depending on the expected therapeutic value. But also over here, the question remains as to whether this range would be sufficient for all situations, for all medicines produced. So with its model, AIM has tried to make the concept of a fair price operational and measurable. And undoubtedly, this model will lead to prices that each stakeholder considers fair and thus can be seen as fair. But however, there is no guarantee. It can occur that an 8% profit margin may not be considered reasonable, or it can occur that an innovation bonus that is set is seen as too high or too low. And of course, the cost limits, a limit of costs can also undermine the essential research in the future. It should also be noted that the prices resulting from the application of this fair pricing model do not necessarily meet the requirement of affordability for everyone. Affordability is, as I've mentioned before, a contextual concept. Whether a patient has a financial access to the drug depends on his financial situation, on reimbursement of the government, and so on. And whether the government can reimburse the medicine depends on the available national budget and the health policies choices they want to make. So back to the methods of Walker and Evans. In steps 5 and 6, the aim is to develop a model case and a contrary case. I think it is possible to create a model case for a fair price in the context of medicines, a case that includes all elements we have discussed in this presentation, but only in a conceptual framework. For example, the next case. A pharmaceutical company develops a new medicine for a rare disease. The medicine is transparently and publicly priced in a way that the responsible investments and costs incurred by the company are covered, while also providing a reasonable profit margin that takes into account the medical value of the medication for patients and society, as well as any uncertainties that may still be present at the time, such as long-term health effects. And this without jeopardizing the willingness of society to pay or the affordability for patients, the government support taken into account, and without discouraging the pharmaceutical industry to keep innovating. Different contrary cases can also be described. For example, the first one, a pharmaceutical company develops a new medicine for a rare disease. The medicine is priced in a way that prioritizes profit maximization without considering the willingness of society to pay and making it unaffordable for most patients, despite low investments and costs. In this case, we can truly speak about a completely contrasting case compared to the model case. The interests of the patients, the interests of the government are entirely subordinated to the interests of the pharmaceutical company. The second case is the next one. A pharmaceutical company develops a new medicine for a rare disease. The medicine is transparently and publicly priced in a way that the responsible investments and costs incurred by the company are covered, while providing a reasonable profit margin that takes into account the medical value of the medication for both patients and society, as well as any uncertainties that may still be present at that time. However, affordability is not guaranteed for all patients. So in this example, many attributes are included, but not all of them. The balance between the interests of the pharmaceutical company, the government, and the patients is slightly disrupted. So we can consider it as a borderline case. A last example is the following one. A pharmaceutical company develops a new medicine for a rare disease. The medicine is priced in a way that, as the pharmaceutical company claims, the investments and costs incurred by the company are covered while providing a reasonable profit margin that considers the medical value of the medication for patients and society, as well as any uncertainties that may still be present at the time. However, the investments and costs are not supported with evidence by the pharmaceutical company. The medication is affordable for most of the patients, taking into account any government support. So in this example, many attributes are included, except for the affordability for a small group of patients. However, there is a kind of certain distrust or mistrust because of the lack of transparency from the pharmaceutical industry. And transparency, as I have mentioned before, is not an attribute of the concept, but a precondition for achieving a fair price. So we consider this also as a borderline case as well because of the mistrust. So the conclusion. The concept analysis and focus group study demonstrate the complexity and inherent subjectivity of the concept of a fair price for a medicine. It is possible to define the concept in a way that includes all elements or all interests, but this inevitably results in a conceptual, purely theoretical definition or case. However, defining a price that is fair for everyone in all circumstances proves to be rather impossible in an operational manner. My thesis provides insight into the elements of a fair price and the potential dilemmas that may arise in practice. Further research should focus on the individual elements of a fair price. We first need to work on operationalizing each of the attributes, each of the elements or characteristics, and create uniform measurable indicators. For example, for measuring the attribute affordability, we could use the price to income ratio indicator, which would involve linking the price of the medicine to the individual's income and stipulating that it should not exceed a certain threshold. However, determining a threshold percentage is not a clear cut. Another example, to measure the costs of developing and bringing the medicine to market, I would recommend to create a standardized model that clarifies which costs and which investments should or should not be considered in price setting. This could involve clarifying aspects like failure costs, like inefficiencies, marketing and advertising costs, and so on. In this way, also the profit margin relative to the cost structure can be assessed more consistently and transparently. But these are just some examples to illustrate that further research is needed into the individual attributes or elements of the concept fair price. Developing and applying uniform empirical reference to these separate elements may help refining the concept of fair price in the context of pharmaceuticals and to make it more measurable in a consistent manner. So thank you all for your attention, and I hope everything is clear, and feel free to ask any questions. I will try to answer them. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabelle. It was a really interesting and very clear presentations. The floor is open for questions, so everybody wants to get some clarification or has a question that Isabelle might hopefully answer. Don't hesitate to write them in the chat, and then you'll be promoted as a panelist to ask your question live to Isabelle. Before I forget, I want to thank Mark Dooms, who recommended Isabelle's presentation to us. Thank you, Mark, for recommending Isabelle. It was really interesting and very interesting, I would say, for the work of I3h. What we do is really working on patient-centric, affordable, innovative medicines. Maybe first question with respect to, you had a group of experts and non-experts. Where, and if so, where did you put the patients? Are they non-experts or are they experts? Because
it depends on the individual situation. There are some patients we have seen as experts in the field because of their personal situation. They were
part of an advisory board or something.
Yeah, they have experienced the high prices of medicine into their personal situation. For example, patients with a very rare disease who has to buy medicines that are truly expensive and there is no reimbursement for the medicine, then we will see that patient as an expert in the field because of the personal situation of that person.
Another question, please. Will give me signs of some other questions. Yeah.
No, not yet. Matthias is connected.
Yeah, Cecilia?
So I don't know if you know the drug repurposing.
Repurposing of drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about the current situation of the pricing of the drug repurposing and how the model that how the fair price can be implemented to price the repurposed drugs, because some of the repurposed drugs, the price is really high.
So repurposed drugs are drugs that are already on the market for a specific indication, which then afterwards they become again marketed for another indication. So actually the development cost is lower since some toxicity studies, safety studies have been done, and this data is already available. So pharmaceutical industry can skip, I would say, phase 1 of the clinical trials. How come some repurposed drugs indeed have such a high price? What is fair about this?
Yes, it is a topic that I have not investigated in my thesis, but it is an interesting question, of course, because the costs are lower than there is the expertise already done. So the question, if the pharmaceutical company can just set the same price as before, it is a very interesting question, and I think a lot of people will say no, it is not fair to have the same price. However, probably there will be in the past failed projects. Maybe the pharmaceutical company wants to recover the costs of failed projects that were made in the beginning of the medicine. So there is the lack of transparency is very concerning. So the pharmaceutical industry, with its lack of transparency, it is for us impossible to see whether the costs made are recovered already or not with the medicines that are produced over and over again, and maybe for some other disease as well. So I think the lack of transparency over here is a big problem to see, because there are the costs of the failed projects in the past, and they have to be recovered to innovate, to encourage the pharmaceutical industry to keep innovating in new research. And there is the risk of failed projects. I think we cannot, that's a certainty that we cannot avoid. So the pharmaceutical industry, it has to be possible that failed projects costs are recovered, but there is the transparency lack. So there is a big issue over there. So it is an interesting question, and I think it will depend on each medicine and each costs that were made separate for each medicine, I think.
Another point is that how did you price the original innovation and the incremental innovation of medicine?
At which comparison? So the new
original innovation and the incremental innovation of the medicine.
What really is the breakthrough innovation? So the real innovation, and then some incremental effects that are added to.
Yeah. Also, that is a big question. Maybe also depending on the target market. I don't know, maybe if they are creating one medicine for a really rare disease, and after a few years it seems that a medicine can also be produced for more common diseases, then we can ask ourselves, okay, which price can be set for that, because the target market is a lot larger. So there are interesting questions, but again, it is the lack of transparency that will be a problem over there, and we have to see for each medicines, for each target market, and so on, how the price can be set for in a fair manner for all of us. So that's a very difficult question, I think.
Shall?
Yes, two remarks and questions. First, you didn't mention patents in your discussion. Clearly, to cover patent costs also contribute to sometimes high prices. If you think about the patents for mRNA vaccine, there are many of them, and obviously these provide additional costs. But my question is more general. Pharma companies are global. They operate all over the world, and they can make choice to develop a specific drug in a country, or what we see for the last year, they can just decide that because the negotiations are too difficult for the government, they just decide not to offer this drug in a specific country. And related to this, you mentioned that in the proposal of price by the companies, obviously there is the profit, but there is also their social commitment. I'm sure that it contributes, but at the end we know that the board of the companies should, and actually it's a legal obligation for companies to optimize their return on investment. So I'm really wondering indeed how this could be taken into consideration when defining a fair price. It's difficult to understand that a fair price might be so different from one country to the other, and then would incentivize companies to have a differential approach, especially now that the Asian countries and China and so on become so important for the farmers.
Yeah, it is certainly a very interesting question, and I think that comes back to the question I ask myself: who is responsible for the fair prices of the medicine? Is it responsibility of the pharmaceutical industry, or is it a responsibility for the society as a whole? Because at this moment, prices indeed are negotiated with all the countries separately, and so the prices can vary between the countries. So the richest countries, or maybe the countries with a larger market target, so the biggest countries with a lot of people over there, they can maybe have some discounts because they will have a lot of more medicines than for our little Belgium. Yeah, we are just a small country, so we will have fewer medicines than, for example, Germany or France. And how the I don't know how to say it in English, but what we see within our country, for example, we have a reimbursement policy that the richer people are paying a lot more than the poorer people. So we can maybe, if we do that over the countries overheen, that the richer countries are paying more than the poorer countries, maybe we can get a fairer price where all of us, it's difficult to say in English.
You mean a tiered pricing system where
Yes.
the higher pay more
Yes.
to cover for the
Yes.
the lower income
Yeah,
countries?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
But it doesn't work.
it
This is
doesn't
not
work.
what's
No. I
hiding
know.
in the
So
countries
it's in my thesis I haven't set a solution for this problem. Certainly not. I don't know if there is a solution. I maybe the fair price doesn't exist at all. I think setting a fair price that is fair for everyone in every situation, in every country, for every person, I think that it's rather impossible with one definition. But I think it is possible to just focus on the individual elements and to make them more operational, to make them more measurable, and to go into a more fair price. Let's say.
If I may add something. I think that this question of different prices from country to country creates, especially for the pharmas, I can tell you, because I discussed with, for example, the CEO of Roche, there is this question of the parallel import, which is a major problem for companies.
Yeah, it is. I know.
We have a question from Anne Hendricks. So Anne is online.
Hello.
Hi. No, I didn't.
Wait, now we hear you.
Well, I didn't. Oh. Do you have lots of echo? Is it okay?
Now it's okay.
It's okay. Yeah, thanks, Isabelle, and really happy that you are using our work to develop it, and good news that we are working on it with I3h. I've put the reference in the chat. Just few answers. The discussion we just had now about the repurposing, the repurposed drugs. These drugs are really the ideal target to try a fair pricing model, because for these drugs it's so easy to identify the cost. I mean, the production costs are very well known, and if you look at the work, like Andrew Hill did a lot of work about real cost of production, so we can know exactly how much it costs. Usually, I mean, if they are repurposed, the R&D is very easily identifiable, because it's a recent R&D and it's really product focused, so it's extremely simple to assess it, and the market is well known usually, so especially if it's a small market, quite easy. So this is really the perfect target to try a fair pricing model. The other thing that you were mentioning, so who is responsible for the fair price? Actually, we always talk in the literature about the return on investment from the companies. They invested a lot, but the governments invest a lot also in research. I mean, the statistics are a bit different, but let's say 1/3 of research globally is paid by the public. So who is responsible for paying back to the public for its investment? Well, the one asking for the price, right? I mean, there is only one person that will get a price, it's a company. So I think the responsibilities are quite clear. What is not clear is what kind of return has to go to each partner. What return for the companies, but what return for the public? So that's the question of public investment. And I would like to also to answer to the last question, how can we have different prices in different countries, and what mechanism is that? I mean, this is called solidarity, and it happens sometimes, not much, but sometimes. And some companies like GSK really use it as a public information, that they really use the profit they make in the north to decrease the prices in the south. And many countries actually, many companies actually have very high prices in some countries and a little bit lower prices in some others, and they play a little bit with that solidarity. And the purpose of a fair price would be that this kind of solidarity could be expanded and much more and be much more automatically implied. So these are my few comments.
Yeah, thank you so much for your comment. It's true. Yeah.
Matthias, you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you for this presentation. I do think that indeed things are complicated, and there is no easy solution. This being said, as you said at some point, the goal is to have fairer prices, at least, so that we tend towards fairer prices. And there, I think that well, I think in a sense, indeed, it is about cost versus value and so on. It's about the fact that, in principle, I mean, the value should be an upper bound of the of the price. Of course, as economists, we don't want companies to extract all the value. It's called monopolies. We want competition, so we want the prices to go closer to the cost. Of course, there is the fixed cost of innovation, and you cannot immediately have marginal cost pricing because otherwise you have no incentive for innovation. As Michel said, of course, patents are there in order to make sure that there is some return to innovation. There is an issue, of course, of who gets the patents and how much they have contributed and all that. So some companies are pretty good at playing that game. I think that the solution should be a mix of things. One thing you haven't really mentioned too much is that, okay, in terms of value, we can talk about the value of a life, even though we don't like to do that. But I guess given the budget reality, that's needed. And then the innovation in terms of CALIs and all these kind of things. And there that puts a ceiling. Because let's face it, even the AIM model, which is indeed an impressive attempt to do things, to compute things, well, if you have very few patients because it's a rare disease, then indeed, in order to make up, you need very high prices, and you can cross the ceiling of the value. And of course, we hate that, especially if we're talking about sick children and the like. But it's fair to say that right now, and it was again stressed in the healthcare or medicine chapter of the Draghi report, you have a huge increase of the budget for rare disease medicines. And at some point, well, we need to face realities. And there, next to these things that should put boundaries, and then there is a whole issue of lack of transparency and the like, and which we know in every sector. Huh? Economists, Jean Tirole got a Nobel Prize for looking at regulation under asymmetric information, all that. But indeed, the lack of transparency in pharma is huge when we talk about the secret prices and all these kind of things. So it is problematic. But I think what we need is indeed some kind of simple principle that would put boundaries and then complement that. And you haven't talked about that, but maybe you can. Ways in which maybe, as you say, some countries have larger markets and may take advantage of that. Now, Europe is supposed to be a single market, but it's not. And especially when we talk about bargaining, there was one exception, which was the von der Leyen Commission joint procurement for COVID vaccines. And I think, frankly, it was not bad. And so one question, well, with Michel and with Alain Fichet, we suggested expanding that to rare diseases. I don't know whether you could see this as a potentially useful way to improve the trade-off between innovation and affordability. Because let's face it, at some level, it is a lose-lose game for European countries when they are played one against the other, saying, look, if you give me higher prices, you'll get it faster. Then it brings what Michel talked about, the parallel imports problem and all that. So we could possibly have these joint procurement with potentially a solidarity mechanism, which we have a lot in Europe. It's called we have transfers between countries depending on their GDP per head level. And so we could introduce maybe that and take advantage of size better, because otherwise, indeed, we are kind of many countries competing against some big companies, which, of course, they are owned by their shareholders and they have to maximize return. Even if, by the way, again with Michel and Alain Fischer, we talked about benefit corporations, that is putting in the chart of the company something more than just profit. And I don't know whether you think it could be a good idea, but so maybe some of these structural changes, together with attempts to derive formulas about fairer prices, could be part of the solution, which would be, let's say, kind of pragmatic. So anyway, so thank you in advance for your reactions to this.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that Europe taking a lead in the pricing debate or negotiate with the pharmaceutical company to set a price for all the European countries, I think it can be a good thing. But of course, for the affordability for the patients, it will always depend on the reimbursement policy of within the national borders. And I think for the reimbursement policy, I think Europe cannot have a lead, I think. So for the pricing debate, just setting the price of the medicines, I think Europe taking the lead can be a solution. But for the reimbursement policy, there will always be the national policy makers that will discuss that topic, and that will have an impact on the affordability for the patients. So I think the affordability problem is just more than just setting the price of the medicine, but it's also the reimbursement policy. So that there also must decisions must be made within the national borders. But of course, Europe taking a lead, just as in the COVID-19 pandemic, can be a solution for a part of the problem. I think that is correct to say.
Thank you.
Thank you to you, and thank you, Matthias, for your comments. If I can just add a few things on that. Actually, regarding the vaccine, joint procurement is part of it, but it's even more than that, because you talk about, de-risking for companies. And actually, there was pre-ordering of vaccine even before they know that the vaccines will be efficient. It's really crazy, because manufacturing facilities were developed at a large scale without knowing whether this vaccine will really work. So this, for the company, were really a very important incentive to invest. So it's joint procurement and pre-ordering. Now, regarding rare diseases, I think there is what we were discussing with Matthias and Alain Fischer, is this anchor system, which is that when you have a high price for example, gene therapy for a rare disease, if the next disease for gene therapy actually affects more patients, which is the case with hemophilia, you still use, the previous price of the drug for which only a few people are eligible, to propose a price for the more common disease. So that's something that we should look at. Finally, the point I would like to make regarding the costs, because when you say, and we say innovation costs, we have to know that for company, the largest costs in R&D are for the late phase clinical trials pre-registration. It's not, very sophisticated lab research. It's really the cost of these late phase clinical trials. Thank you.
In the meantime, Anne, raise your hand again, Anne.
Yes, just to complement that, I fully agree with what was said. Just to say that indeed, last phase are the most expensive phases for research, and the good thing about orphan medicines is that they don't cost that much in that phase, because you cannot test them on many patients, so they have quite limited cost. They are quite easily, well, not all of them, some are quite, the population is quite easy to identify. The budget could be quite easy to to evaluate. And I think it would be a very good target to try a new joint procurement. But unfortunately, I think the problem of access would not be solved still, because the problem would be diagnostic and access to the treatment in each country. So that's the problem with the rare diseases, that often it's not just a question of affordability of the drug. It's much more than that. It's building up an infrastructure that would allow this kind of patient to be identified. But it's probably and as we discussed, repurposed drug, well-known repurposed drugs for a rare disease would probably be the easiest way also for the Commission if they want to try another joint procurement, because this is not a sensitive issue. This is not big pharma developing repurposing the drugs. Usually it's not the biggest one. It's usually smaller company trying to, they found something and so it's not a really dangerous target, and so maybe it's an easiest target to play with, because it will not imply immediately that the system will be generalized. That could be a good target. So I think it's a good way for everybody to work on these repurposed drugs.
Maybe I can comment on this last remark, Anne, because we just, together with Sisian and Sana, we just concluded an analysis where we found that actually drug repurposing is really a new strategy of big pharmaceutical companies, with the market leader in bringing repurposed drugs on the market is Eli Lilly. In 2023, there were, I don't know how many, a lot of repurposed drugs, and they really see it as a new strategy to bring new, profits on or to bring in more profits and recoup for the blockbusters that are over, the blockbuster drugs, sorry. So I think, it might be a way to look at the model through a repurposed drug, but indeed then really looking at a drug that came on the market, that was brought on the market by a smaller biotech company or a spin-off company.
And this is one more reason to attack this market, because if this is really the future of innovation, this is the moment to try to set reasonable prices on that, because this is where the biggest abuse can be in repurposed drugs. So it's probably a momentum.
Yes. Indeed, and that's I would say why I3h researchers are really looking at that. Not sure whether there are, maybe just one more comment given by Mark Toom, that transparency from the side of the reimbursement agency, Zivinami, is now better, and he gave a link. We can post it together with recordings of this reading seminar. If there are no further questions, then I would like to thank Isabelle for her very interesting presentation. Thank and thank you all the people who were present here and online to have this nice discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Matthias.